In the summer of 2021, the four of us enjoyed 3 weeks in the Snake River watershed of the northern Yukon. The Snake River parallels the divide that marks the boundary between the Yukon and Northwest Territories. This proximity to the divide creates fantastic mountain scenery and sets the stage for accessible, phenomenal hiking. We split the trip into 11 days of backpacking and 12 or so days of paddling and day hiking. On July 26th, we climbed on a float plane near the town of Mayo and flew into Duo Lakes near the head of the Snake River. We were picked up on August 18th at Taco Bar, which is a large gravel bar at the confluence of the Peel and Snake Rivers. We had a morning flight from Mayo, so arrived at Duo Lakes in plenty of time to carry the canoes and paddles to the river, about 2 kilometers away. Duo Lakes is a spectacular place to begin a trip. It is easy to see why many parties camp here for a few days to enjoy the hiking and scrambling opportunities. The next morning, we carried the canoeing food and gear to the river and stashed it all with the boats. We then shouldered our backpacking outfits and headed off on a 7-day, 75-kilometer circuit around the headwaters of the Snake River. Intermittent moose trails provided some breaks as we thrashed through dense willow thickets and dwarf birch tangles for most of the first day. We found the willow line was about the 1,400-meter contour on our topo maps. Fortunately, we stayed above that line for most of the hike and only had to contend with serious bushwhacking on our first and last day's hiking. Our modest distance each day afforded time for leisurely lunches, botanizing, and long evening wanders to explore around camp. We were a bit late in the season for peak wildflowers, but it still was an amazing show. Our second day of hiking acquainted us to a less friendly side of Yukon mountain weather. Driving sleet greeted us at the top of our first high alpine pass. A short break in the precipitation enabled a quick lunch in the cold wind. Wet feet and heavy boots were the order for the afternoon as we stomped along through a steady drizzle. An early camp was set at the base of the next pass. Of course, when the tarp was secured, the rain quit and we enjoyed a relatively dry evening. This gave us the opportunity to revel in the spectacular wildflower garden just above camp.
Togo and Benin are pretty small.
Not Ghana? Because that's Togo's right beside Ghana, isn't it?
Didn't I say Ghana?
No.
Togo, Benin, Ghana, and Ivory Coast. And we're still talking about going to Egypt and Sudan in the fall.
Sudan is brave.
Sink here. Okay, we'll do that.
Members of the bonnet plume caribou herd put in a daily appearance. They would scamper away only to turn and circle closer. A couple of times they wandered right up to us in camp. It was fascinating to see the caribou, especially bulls, standing sentinel on top of the high ridges. From their vantage point, they were looking down on everything. Even the Dall sheep that watched us from the cliffs above camp had to look up at the caribou. We presumed that they were staying well clear of predators. We were surprised that, for the first few days, water quality was a real problem. Most of the creeks tasted metallic and coated their beds with a hard crust of orange scum. However, with a bit of searching, we always could find some healthy-looking and sweet-tasting water. The immensity of this landscape is almost overwhelming. We truly did feel like little specks crawling across the scenery. The broad, glacier-carved, U-shaped valleys enabled us to look ahead a long way. Our destinations always looked nearby, but it would take hours to get there. We crossed into the Northwest Territories one afternoon and camped in the headwaters of Orthogonal Creek, a tributary of the Arctic Red River. A large willow thicket beside camp was alive with small birds, including many robins. A trio of predatory northern shrikes must have found this a virtual smorgasbord because they kept returning to the big willow near where we cooked supper. Our highest campsite was at 1,700 meters. The 350-meter climb to ascend the pass was very gradual, with only some brief bits of willow scrub to negotiate. Once again, we could see our destination from lunch and could plot the easiest route. Other than the second day, which treated us to a long afternoon of rain, the weather on the hike was mostly blue sky. Smoke from distant fires cloaked the mountains for a couple of days and made for some moody photos. The smoke got thick enough to worry us about proximity of the fire, so we called the float base. They assured us that the Snake River and Bonnet Plume valleys were not going up in flames. The crux of the hike was crossing a 2,000-meter ridge on the second last day. It looked tough on the map, but a well-trodden caribou path led us right over. We shared the path with a big bull caribou that trotted up behind us. He detoured through the loose scree below us, then charged ahead to the top.
See what you mean? It's a bit of a kisser. God damn. What's that? Got the audio turned off on that, Greg?
You have sound on that thing? Oh, good.
That's probably not the route to go.
Every willow thicket was full of moose sign. The animals kept well hidden until we were wading across the Snake River to reach our canoes. There, a long-legged cow and her young partner trotted across the river just above us. We were wet to our knees. They hardly splashed their ankles. We took advantage of the sunny day to wash our clothes and bodies in the river. After that, we assembled the pack canoe and organized our gear for the paddling portion of our trip. On this trip, we brought a composite Kevlar fiberglass boat and a fold-up pack canoe. Both of these craft have done their share of service on northern rivers. We were concerned about the low water level in the river. The first 11 kilometers or so, to Reptile Creek, are through a low canyon. Numerous boulder bars and undercut tight corners obstructed by sharp rocks provided the entertainment. We lined the canoes around several corners in order to preserve hull integrity. At Reptile Creek, we camped beside a large party who were repairing one of their canoes. We were informed that they had paddled everything and only stepped out of the boats when they got stuck on a rock. I guess paddling a plastic rental canoe makes one feel a bit rock-proof. Heavy rain in the afternoon encouraged us to huddle in our cook shelter. We watched the creek and river quickly swell into a murky brown torrent. This subsided just as quickly, and the next morning we paddled on a clear stream. Above Reptile Creek, the Snake River is a bit murky, and deposits of iron oxide mud reminded us of some of the headwater creeks we had hiked past. Reptile Creek is crystal clear and almost the same volume as the Snake. Their combined flow is clear and without the deposits of rust-colored gunk. More river volume equated to no more walking the boats, but we still had to be alert for rocks. About 16 kilometers below Reptile Creek, we made camp so we could spend a day hiking up the creek west of the river. This creek rises in a southern outlier of the Mount Macdonald Massif. The blocky cliffs of limestone provide the foundation for some impressive scenery. We encountered a grizzly bear during this hike. He was head down in a patch of buffalo berry, trying to pack on some calories. Once he realized that he had an audience, he stood tall for a good look, then bolted up the mountainside. Bear spray and bear bangers were in hand, but not needed. We stopped a further 13 kilometers downstream for a 4-day hiking trip to explore around the southern end of Mount Macdonald, the highest peak in this part of the world. After crossing a ridge by the river, we ascended a creek directly to the mountain. We dubbed the mountain Misty Mountain, not because we expected to encounter hobbits and dragons, but because it seemed to propagate clouds and rainy weather. During the 4 days, we only saw the top of the mountain a handful of times, even though we could see clear sky and sunshine down in the river valley. It was an awe-inspiring place, made more so by tendrils of mist swathing the brooding grey limestone cliffs.
Nothing just really feels right.
No, I'm in search of one.
Yeah.
fishermen it's back there taking a video of us. In the middle, eh?
Put the middle in.
Yeah. Take a little soup in there, isn't it?
So all this black stuff really garbage.
We stopped briefly at Milk Creek to inspect the silt-laden water spilling into the river. The silt was our parting gift from the glacier on Misty Mountain and raised the concern about clean drinking water. However, many clear streams joined the Snake and soon diluted the evidence of Milk Creek. We encountered our first serious rapids at the Big Bend. The river was quite pushy by this point, and we were kept on our toes dodging large rocks and waves. We named our camp at the end of the Big Bend as Vista Camp. It provided a 360-degree panorama of mountains with the river bubbling past. We were exposed to the weather, so fortunately the wind took the evening off. Early in the trip, we had decided to portage the Snake Canyon, which contains the most serious rapid on the river. Therefore, we didn't waste any time or emotional capital scouting and discussing the best line through the rapid. We just shouldered the gear and grovelled up the muddy path through the forest. An enjoyable wander across the treeless hilltop and a well-defined trail back to the river completed the carry. Pretty easy as portages go. For about 15 kilometers below the canyon, there are frequent rapids, but they gradually diminish in difficulty and paddling becomes more relaxing. A few kilometers later, a major stream from the east joins the river. The creek flows past the Chevron iron ore discovery, and it delivers bright red, iron-rich jasper pebbles to the Snake. The river continues the polishing job, and from that point on, all gravel bars are populated with water-smoothed scarlet stones. At most of our stops, we entertained ourselves by picking up and admiring the colorful jaspers and a wide variety of conglomerate cobbles. We stopped at Waterfall Creek for a look and decided to spend the night. This scenic spot deservedly is one of the more popular campsites along the river. There was lots of room for our 2 tents and nice clear water tumbling down the creek.
Can't consider it too.
A major rapid begins right below Waterfall Creek. We dodged the roughest water by crossing the river twice to hug the inside of the bends. A small ledge jutting out from the right side was the last obstacle, and we snuck between it and the large waves and holes in river center. After the rapid, we paddled only a short distance and camped to take one last hike in the mountains. We erected the tents and had the bannock cooked just as the clouds descended and engulfed us in cold, driving mist. It reminded me of a March holiday in Ireland. Our planned hike was put on hold in the hope of clearer weather, which never showed up. At about the halfway point of the canoe trip, the Snake River abruptly leaves the mountains and cuts down into the Peel Plateau. The scenery dramatically changes from a broad valley with sweeping views of the peaks to a narrow valley incised deeply into the relatively flat plateau. For most of the lower Snake, the river is heavily braided. Often it is a lottery to choose the best channel, and we always had to be alert for midstream logs that were anchored in the riverbed. We successfully kept safe and our feet dry by following 2 simple strategies. Our first rule was to never take a freshly eroded channel because they had many blind corners with steep, unstable banks and were often choked with sweepers and log jams. Our second strategy, of taking the channel that dropped first off the gravel bar, did not always pan out, but we never had to walk the boats. Like most parties, we spent the bulk of our days enjoying the mountain scenery and hiking opportunities, so had to pick up the paddling pace once the mountains were behind. The current remains fast until just before the Peel confluence, so it is easy to extend the daily distance to 50 or 60 kilometers. Most of the tributaries entering the lower Snake River are quite muddy or stained brown with tannin. Therefore, the river becomes more turbid as it progresses, and finding palatable drinking water can be a challenge. We chose campsites on high gravel bars that are islands in flood time. In lower water, the channels behind these islands are not fed directly from the river, but water leaks into them through the gravel. Therefore, these channels often have small streams carrying clear, filtered river water. We enjoyed the lower Snake River. We paddled beneath towering cliffs and past mixed forests of balsam poplar, birch, and spruce. Peregrine falcons nested on many of the cliffs. They loudly objected to our intrusion, but were hard to see if they did not fly. Every sandy spot beside the river was well populated with moose, bear, and wolf tracks. A steady rain greeted us on the morning of our last day. We paddled quickly to the Peel confluence, then down the couple of kilometers to Taco Bar. The cloud cover was quite high, so we phoned the float base, and the pilot agreed to pick us up right away. That saved us from a final soggy night.